As long as some among us are oppressed, and we are part of that oppression, it must blunt our faith and sap the strength of our high purpose. Thus, this is a victory for the freedom of the American Negro, but it is also a victory for the freedom of the American nation.
61 years ago, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law, helping advance equal access to the ballot box by banning racial discrimination. Now, court rulings, new election laws, and federal policy proposals are renewing questions about voter access. CBS News election law contributor David Becker joins me now. So, David, what do you see as the Voting Rights Act greatest impact on our elections?
Yeah, 61 years ago today, President Johnson signed that into law, and that was just months after that infamous Bloody Sunday where Alabama state troopers beat peaceful civil rights activists, multiracial, multi-faith, including people like John Lewis. And in that last 61 years, I think most observers, including myself, I used to serve in the Justice Department in the voting section enforcing the Voting Rights Act, consider it to be the single most successful and effective piece of civil rights legislation in American history. We have steadily seen the representation of minorities, not just in Congress, but in state legislatures and in local county boards and city councils, grow, not to the point where they are overly proportionally represented, but just to the point where they have a say in the government that controls their lives. That's remarkable. And yet, over the past 15 years or so, we've also seen an assault on that Voting Rights Act. In 2013, the Supreme Court ruled back a really key provision that was focused on the states that had the greatest history of racism in voting. That was gone in 2013. And then just a couple of months ago, of course, the Supreme Court really radically rolled back the protections under the main provisions of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which means it's going to be much, much more difficult, even when we see racially polarized voting. In other words, white voters who refuse to vote for candidates who are minorities, even where we see that, it's going to be much, much more difficult for them to get some kind of remedy.
Supporters of measures like the SAVE Act argue they're needed to strengthen election integrity. Opponents say it would create new barriers for eligible voters. So what does the evidence tell us about that debate?
Well, first of all, we don't really know what the SAVE Act is at this point. It's been just changing constantly. It doesn't really have any particular meaning right now. The president seems very focused on it, but I can tell you in talking to election officials of both parties, Republicans and Democrats, it's very hard to find any of them that think it will improve election integrity, but they are concerned about how much it will impose an incredibly expensive, vast new bureaucracy on them and put huge barriers on people like married women who might not have citizenship documentation that matches their ID, meaning they're going to need additional documentation on multiple occasions. The reality is, though, fortunately, I think from the perspective of election officials and many Democrats and Republicans, it is almost certainly not going to pass. And regardless of even if there was a slight chance it might pass, it would be blocked by the courts at this point. We're less than 3 months away from the 2026 election in November, on November 3rd. There is no way to implement any massive changes to elections at this point. And I think the courts would likely view that as something that can't be done until 2027.
Okay, David Becker, thank you.